The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was as if the whole world had decided to pause for a single moment, just long enough for me to realize that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't an event, a specific action, or a shocking discovery. It wasn't a fight or an argument. No, it was a stillness, a shift, something almost imperceptible that I could feel deep in my bones. The kind of quiet that makes your heart race. The kind of quiet that only happens when everything is about to change. The party had been going on for hours. Laughter, music, and clinking glasses filled the space. But for me, it had become a blur of faces and noise. I wasn't paying attention anymore. Not to the conversations, not to the jokes, not to the people. I was too busy trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach. Claire had been distant for weeks, but I couldn't put my finger on why. We'd been married for 5 years, and she was, well, different lately. Not in any obvious way, just subtle shifts in her behavior. Little things, like how she spent more time on her phone than talking to me, or how she seemed distracted, her laughter carrying a hollow sound. But I told myself, I was just being paranoid. Life had been hectic for both of us. Work, friends, family. It happens. It wasn't anything to worry about. Except now it was. The moment it hit me, I was standing in the corner of the room, nursing my third drink of the night. My eyes scanned over the crowd, trying to keep my focus on something, anything. That's when I saw him. He wasn't anyone special, at least not to me. Just another guy, probably a friend of a friend. But there was something about the way he was standing there, half smiling, talking to Claire. She was laughing, her hand lightly touching his arm, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. At first, I brushed it off. It was just a friendly conversation. Claire was friendly, outgoing, always the life of the party. But there was something different about the way she was interacting with him. She wasn't just talking. She wasn't just laughing. She was engaged. Her smile was deeper, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in a while. And him? He wasn't just some guy. He was enjoying it too. Too much. That's when I felt it, a ripple of awareness cutting through the fog in my mind. My chest tightened, and for a moment, the noise of the party faded into the background. The world stopped, and in that single moment, I realized something. Something had shifted. Something had changed between us, and I was just starting to understand it. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to believe it. But I couldn't ignore the feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was the kind of feeling that gnaws at you, the kind that makes you question everything. Could I trust her? Was I imagining things, or was there something more to this? I couldn't watch it any longer. My feet moved before I could even think. I turned away and walked out into the hallway, away from the noise, the laughter, the party. The cool air hit my face, sharp and unforgiving, but it didn't calm me. I couldn't think straight. I needed answers. But the thing is, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, but all I could think about was the way they looked at each other. The way she smiled. The way his eyes lingered a little too long on her face. Maybe I was being dramatic, but in that moment, I felt like everything was unraveling. I needed space, some distance to think. But as I stood there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Claire. "Where are you?" It was short, casual, but something about it felt off. She hadn't even noticed the way things had shifted between us. Not yet. And that's when I realized I was standing at the edge of something. A cliff I had been inching toward for months without even realizing it. A cliff that could either lead to everything falling apart, or it could pull me back into the safety of what we once had. The thing was, I didn't know if I was ready to turn back. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. I was already too far gone to just forget what I had seen. And when I turned around, I was met with a sight that made my heart stop. Claire was standing there, in the doorway. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something raw in them. Fear? Guilt? Or maybe just uncertainty. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for what came next. But it had already started. The first crack in everything I knew, and there was no turning back now. Her presence in the doorway felt like a sudden storm, the kind that rolls in quietly but grows into something uncontrollable. I hadn't heard her footsteps, hadn't even registered when she had left the party. But there she was, standing just a few feet away, watching me with those eyes that used to hold all the warmth in the world. But now, there was something different in them, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was just fear, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary situation. This wasn't something we'd be able to brush off. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft, almost cautious. It was a far cry from the confident, carefree tone I had heard earlier that evening, when she was laughing and talking to everyone like the life of the party. "We need to talk." I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I wanted to, but the image of her laughing with him, Jake, I think his name was, kept flashing through my mind, like a film I couldn't turn off. Every time I tried to focus, I saw them together, standing too close, her hand brushing his arm, her head tilting slightly as she looked at him. She wasn't even looking at me like that anymore. That's what hurt the most, the change. It wasn't something dramatic, but it was there, clear as day. I took a deep breath and forced myself to meet her gaze. "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice sounding sharper than I intended. I wasn't sure if I wanted answers or if I was too scared to hear the truth. But something inside me was pushing me forward, urging me to get to the bottom of it. I wasn't just going to stand here and pretend nothing had happened. Not after everything I'd seen. Claire hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the room, her eyes never leaving mine. There was a slight tremble in her voice when she spoke next, but she tried to mask it with a smile. "I don't know how to say this, but I think we need to take a step back. Things have been different between us lately." Different? That was the word she chose. I could feel the weight of the moment crushing down on me. I wanted to scream, to ask her what had happened, what was going on between her and that guy, but I couldn't make my voice work. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, trying to process everything. The silence between us was suffocating. She continued, her voice cracking slightly as she spoke. "I've been feeling this distance between us for a while now, and I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. I think we both know things aren't the same." She paused, then added, almost in a whisper, I've been confused. I don't know how to explain it." I felt my heart drop to my stomach. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but there was something about the way she spoke, so vulnerable, so unsure, that made me want to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be fine. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not anymore. Not after what I had seen, after the way she had looked at him. "You've been confused?" I repeated, my voice quieter now, though still thick with emotion. "Is that what this is? You've been confused?" "Because, Claire, I don't know what I saw tonight, but I saw it. I saw the way you were with him. I saw the way he looked at you." My words came out faster now, as I tried to hold back the storm building inside of me. "And don't try to tell me it's nothing. You can't be confused when you're so happy around him, when you're so alive with him." Her eyes widened for a moment, a flicker of something, shock, regret, maybe even fear, flashing across her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. "Ethan, please," she started, but I wasn't done yet. "No, don't say please. Don't ask me to just let this go." I took a step forward, feeling the anger rise within me. "You can't just expect me to forget what I saw, Claire. You can't just pretend like I didn't notice you pulling away, like I didn't see the way you were laughing with him." My voice broke a little at the end of the sentence, and I could feel the frustration bubbling over. "So don't stand there and tell me you've been confused. What have you been doing, Claire? What's really going on?" For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes locked on mine, a mixture of guilt and uncertainty flashing in her gaze. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. It was as if she was searching for the right words, but they weren't coming. I didn't know what she was trying to say, but I could see the walls closing in on her, the weight of whatever was happening between us settling heavily on her shoulders. She started, then paused again. "I don't know what to say." Her words hung in the air between us, as if we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. My chest tightened, and for the first time, I felt like I was losing her. Not just to someone else, but to this strange, unspoken distance that had crept into our lives. And then, just as quickly as it had started, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to beg her for answers. I wasn't going to sit here and wait for her to decide if I was worth it or not. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "You don't have to say anything, Claire," I said quietly, but with finality. "I see it. I've seen enough. You've already made your choice." With that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. Not at her, not at anything. I just walked. Because what was the point of staying? What was the point of holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers? And as I closed the door behind me, I realized this wasn't just the end of the night. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't expect the cold to hit me so hard as I stepped outside. The night air felt like it was cutting through me, sharp and unforgiving, but I couldn't focus on the chill. I couldn't focus on anything except the pounding in my chest, the way my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I wanted to leave, to drive somewhere far, to escape the suffocating sense of betrayal that was settling deep within me. But no matter how far I walked or how fast I tried to run, I couldn't escape the reality of what was happening. The truth was already in front of me, and no amount of distance would change it. I found myself wandering aimlessly, my feet taking me down a street I didn't recognize. Everything around me felt muted, like the world was in a different dimension and I was just a spectator. People were out, laughing, talking, but all I could hear was the echo of her voice in my mind. The words she hadn't said, but that I knew all too well. The way she had tried to explain herself, confused. It was the worst thing she could have said. Confusion wasn't an excuse. It wasn't an explanation. It was just an admission that she didn't know what she wanted. And that, in itself, was the most damning thing of all. I stopped in front of a diner, my reflection staring back at me through the glass. I looked like a man who had just lost everything. And in some ways, I had. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought was solid, was crumbling around me. It wasn't just the physical distance that had grown between Claire and me. It was everything. The silence, the lies we both ignored, the things we didn't say but knew we needed to. But why had she let it get this far? Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she just leave if she wasn't happy? I turned and walked inside the diner, trying to shake the feeling of being completely lost. I sat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and waited for the warmth to kick in. I needed something to ground me, something to hold on to, even if it was just the bitter taste of caffeine. My mind kept circling back to her, to that moment when I left the room, when I walked away without looking back. I wasn't sure if I'd made the right decision, but in that instant, it felt like the only choice I had. The coffee arrived, and I took a sip, staring out the window into the dimly lit street. The city felt so alive, so full of movement, and yet I was completely numb. The sounds of the world outside barely registered as I sank deeper into my thoughts. Was I overreacting? Was I really seeing things the way they were? Or was I imagining it all? Was Claire really in love with him? Had something been happening for months? Or was this just my paranoia getting the best of me? I didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. I couldn't just let it go. Not now. Not after what I saw. Not after the way she looked at him. I didn't have the luxury of ignorance anymore. I wasn't going to just wait around, hoping everything would magically fix itself. If something had changed, then I needed to know what it was, and I needed to know why. It wasn't until I got the message that everything started to shift again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out without thinking. The name on the screen made my stomach twist. Claire. She hadn't called. She hadn't even tried to reach out until now. I stared at the message for a few seconds, trying to prepare myself for whatever it was. Can we talk when you get back? The simplicity of it hit me harder than any grand declaration ever could. There were no apologies, no explanations, just a request to talk. A request that felt like an ultimatum. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, staring at the message, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on me. Did I want to go back? Did I want to hear whatever it was she had to say? I wasn't sure. But there was one thing I knew for certain. Things would never be the same again. I stayed in the diner for another hour, letting the minutes tick by, letting the world continue to move without me. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, clarity, courage, a sign that things would work out. But nothing came. There was no moment of revelation, no sudden sense of peace. The only thing I had now was the certainty that I couldn't go back to what we had. It was gone. It had been gone for a while, and I had just been too blind to see it. Eventually, I paid for my coffee and left the diner, my footsteps heavy against the pavement. I wasn't walking with a sense of purpose anymore. I wasn't walking with any kind of direction. I was simply moving. The message from Claire still lingered in my mind, like an invitation to a conversation I didn't want to have, but knew I had to. When I finally walked through the door of our apartment, Claire was sitting on the couch. She didn't look up when I entered, and I could feel the tension in the room before I even said a word. It was like the air was thick, and no matter how much we tried to breathe, we couldn't escape it. "Ethan," she started, her voice shaking slightly, but she didn't finish. She just looked at me, her eyes pleading. I wanted to be angry, to scream at her, to demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, frozen. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to process everything that was happening. I didn't want this, she said quietly, her voice cracking. I didn't want any of this to happen. I wanted to ask her what this was, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. There was too much riding on this conversation, too much hanging in the balance. I was about to hear something that would either break us completely or give us a chance to fix what was broken. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. And as I stepped forward, I felt like I was walking into the unknown. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at Claire, waiting for her to speak. The words she had said earlier, "I didn't want this," echoed in my mind like a distorted melody. I could see the effort it took for her to gather her thoughts, to form a sentence that wouldn't completely destroy everything we'd built. But I didn't know if I wanted her to speak, not really. Every word felt like a final blow to whatever fragile connection we had left. I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make everything go back to normal, but I couldn't. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I really am." She stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving mine, like she was waiting for me to do something, anything, to show her that I wasn't completely lost to her. I was still frozen, my mind racing to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. I wanted to yell at her, to demand answers, to ask her how she could let it get to this point. But all I could do was stare. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that she was truly sorry. But another part of me, the part that had been watching her all night, the part that had seen how she looked at him, wasn't ready to let go of the feeling that I had been betrayed. That this wasn't just a misunderstanding, but a complete and utter breach of trust. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You didn't want to hurt me? Claire, you've been distant for weeks. You've been pulling away, and you're telling me you didn't want to hurt me?" I couldn't contain the bitterness in my tone anymore. "If you didn't want to hurt me, why did you let it happen? Why did you let everything fall apart like this? Why didn't you just tell me?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if the weight of my words had hit her harder than anything she'd expected. "I didn't know how. I didn't know how to tell you that I wasn't happy anymore, that I was lost." Her voice cracked, and I could see the pain in her eyes. But it wasn't just the pain of regret. It was the kind of pain that came from years of pretending, from pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "I didn't know how to say it," she continued, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know how to tell you that I was falling for someone else." I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't want to hear it. I thought I had been prepared for anything, but hearing her say that, it shattered me. The idea that she had been feeling this way for so long, that she had been living a lie in front of me, was more than I could handle. I didn't want to know this version of the truth. Not this. Not the cold reality that we had been drifting apart while I had been oblivious to the signs. The betrayal stung like nothing I had ever felt before. And yet, as much as I hated the words, a part of me couldn't stop listening, couldn't stop wanting to know more. "So him," I said, almost in a daze. I didn't need to say his name. She knew who I meant. "You've been seeing him behind my back? While I was here, thinking everything was fine." Her gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet my eyes any longer. "No, I didn't cheat on you, Ethan. I swear. But I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to make it stop. I didn't want to hurt you by leaving, but I couldn't keep living a lie. I couldn't keep pretending that I was happy when I wasn't." She wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice trembling. "I never wanted this to happen, but it did, and I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, hot and fierce. I had been living in a house of mirrors for months, walking around blindfolded, unaware of how the reflection of my life had been distorted. And now, Claire was standing in front of me, offering me pieces of truth, fractured pieces that didn't even make sense. I wanted to scream, to demand that she explain it all, but I was too exhausted. I was too crushed by the weight of everything. "You did cheat on me, Claire," I said, my voice low but cutting. "You've been cheating on me for months, just with your emotions, with your mind, with your heart. It doesn't matter if you didn't sleep with him. You were already gone." The words tasted bitter, but they were the truth. And the truth hurt more than anything else. Claire shook her head, her lips trembling as if she was fighting to speak. I never. Don't. I interrupted, holding up my hand. I don't want to hear it. You've already told me everything I need to know. She took a step back, as if my words had physically struck her. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and I hated myself for making her cry, even though part of me wanted to see her feel the weight of what she had done. Ethan, please, don't walk away from me, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Please. But the thing was, I didn't know if I could keep fighting for something that was already over. I didn't know if I wanted to anymore. The person I had loved, the woman I had trusted, wasn't standing in front of me anymore. The woman in front of me was someone else, someone I didn't recognize. I didn't know who she was, but I knew who I wasn't anymore. I wasn't the man who could forgive everything. I wasn't the man who could pretend that things would magically go back to the way they were. I can't do this anymore, Claire, I said, my voice steady, even though my insides were torn apart. I can't fix something that's already broken, and I can't keep pretending like I don't know the truth. Her face crumpled, and I could see the despair settling over her, but there was nothing left for me to give. I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision, but in that moment, I knew I had to walk away. I had to leave. I'm sorry, I whispered, but the words felt hollow. And with that, I turned and walked out the door. The door closed behind me with a hollow thud, and the sound seemed to echo in my mind, a reminder that everything had changed. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the door, my hand still resting on the cold doorknob, as if I could somehow turn back time if I just held on a little longer. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I had already made my decision. Claire's pleas, her apologies, none of it mattered anymore. Not after everything. Not after the weight of her words and the realization that our marriage had been unraveling behind my back for who knows how long. I walked down the hall, the sound of my footsteps muffled against the soft carpet, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts that couldn't quite fit together. The city outside the apartment window seemed distant now, as if I was in a completely different world. The lights, the cars, the distant hum of life, it all felt foreign to me. Nothing felt familiar, not even my own thoughts. I made my way down the stairs, my heart heavy in my chest, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not in that apartment, not in that life. I needed to clear my head, to put some distance between me and the mess I had just walked away from. But where would I go? The truth was, I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to be alone, but I didn't want to face Claire either. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses, her apologies. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back. The air outside hit me like a wave, cold and bracing. I breathed in deeply, letting the sharpness of the night fill my lungs. But the air did nothing to clear the fog in my mind. The weight of everything that had happened, everything Claire had confessed, pressed down on me with every step I took. It felt like I was walking in circles, lost in a world where nothing made sense. I kept replaying the moment when she told me everything, the confession, the pain in her voice. But I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How had we gotten here? How had things become so broken? I didn't want to think about the other man, the one she had been falling for. I didn't want to think about Jake, the guy who had somehow slipped past me and into the space that had once belonged to us. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, standing too close to Claire, laughing at things I couldn't hear, touching her arm in that way that was too familiar. The jealousy bubbled up inside me again, sharp and searing, but it was more than just that. It was the realization that I hadn't been enough for her. That somehow, despite everything we had built together, I had lost her without even knowing it. The streets were quieter now, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop walking. I kept moving, my legs carrying me further and further away from the place I thought I'd called home. The sound of my shoes hitting the pavement was the only thing I could focus on, the only thing that made any sense. Step by step, I walked away from the life I had known, from the life that had been torn apart so unexpectedly. I ended up at the edge of the park, the one Claire and I used to walk through when we first started dating. It felt like a lifetime ago. The benches were empty now, the street lamps casting long shadows over the ground. The stillness of the park mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. I sat down on one of the benches, my hands resting in my lap as I tried to make sense of everything. But there was no clarity, No easy answers. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my finger hovering over Claire's name, but I couldn't bring myself to call her. What would I say? What could she say? There were no words left to bridge the gap that had grown between us. The space between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental. It was a void that had been there for months, maybe longer, and I had only just started to see it. I had been so blinded by the idea of what we were, of what we had been, that I couldn't see the cracks forming around me. The phone buzzed in my hand, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Claire. I stared at it for a few seconds, unsure of what to do with it. She was reaching out again, trying to make sense of the chaos. But I wasn't sure I could anymore. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Ethan, please come home. I can't do this alone. I need you. The words hit me harder than I expected. She needed me? She needed me? After everything? I ran my hand through my hair in frustration, staring at the message. The raw desperation in her words clawed at me, pulling me back toward her, back toward the apartment that felt like a prison now. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't return to a life that had been built on so many lies, on so many unspoken truths. I wasn't ready to face her, to face myself in the aftermath of all of this. I felt the tears start to sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to break down. Not here, not now. I had to hold it together, even if it felt like the world was slipping through my fingers. Instead of replying to her message, I shut off my phone. I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't ready for any more apologies. I needed time. Time to figure out what came next. Time to heal, even if I didn't know how to start. I stood up from the bench, took one last look at the dark park, and walked away. There was no going back. Not for me. Not after everything. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a haze. Time seemed to stretch and shrink in a way I couldn't make sense of. Some moments felt like they lasted hours, while others passed in the blink of an eye. But through it all, one thing remained constant. The gnawing emptiness that grew inside me every time I thought about Claire. Every time I thought about the life we had built together, the love that once felt so certain and secure, now slipping through my fingers like sand. I stayed in a small hotel on the other side of the city for the first few nights, telling myself it was just temporary, that I needed space to think. But as the days turned into nights, and the nights blurred into more days, I realized that I wasn't just trying to find space. I was avoiding her. I was avoiding the truth. The truth that, no matter how much I wanted things to go back to the way they were, they never could. The silence between us grew deafening. I didn't respond to Claire's messages or calls, despite how much my phone buzzed with her name flashing across the screen. I couldn't do it. I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, her pleas for forgiveness. But I was also scared of what would happen if I did pick up. What if I gave in to the temptation to go back to her? What if I believed the promises she had made? What if I walked right back into the same cycle of lies and hurt that had led us here? I tried to keep busy. I spent hours walking through the city, lost in the crowds of people who didn't know me, who didn't know my pain. I visited old haunts, places I had once gone with Claire, cafes, bookstores, parks, hoping that the familiarity would bring some sense of comfort. But instead, all it did was remind me of what I had lost. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on me. But even with all my distractions, I couldn't escape the thoughts of her. I couldn't escape the image of Claire, her face, her smile, her voice. And I couldn't escape the sense of betrayal that hung over me like a cloud. She had said she didn't want to hurt me, that she was confused, but how could she be? How could she not know what she was doing? How could she have let things get so far? It was late one evening, as I sat at a bar nursing a drink I barely tasted, that I saw him. Jake, the man who had become the symbol of everything that had gone wrong between Claire and me. He was sitting at a table across the room, laughing with a group of friends, his presence as easy and natural as it had been at the party that night. I recognized him instantly, and as much as I wanted to turn away, to ignore the pain bubbling up inside me, I couldn't. My eyes locked onto him, and for the first time, I realized just how much I hated him. Not because he had done anything overtly wrong, not because of any physical betrayal, but because he had become the embodiment of Claire's disconnect from me. He had become the symbol of everything that had torn us apart. I watched him for a while, his carefree demeanor, his easy smile, the way people gravitated toward him. And then, without thinking, I stood up. My feet carried me across the room before I could stop myself. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, what I was going to do. But all I knew was that I needed to confront it. I needed to understand why he had become so important to her. Why he had come to represent the thing I had lost. I stood in front of his table before I even realized I had walked up to him. He looked up, surprised. Then his eyes flicked to the drink in my hand and back to my face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with that same confident, smooth tone I'd heard from across the room. I didn't answer immediately. I just stared at him, my mind whirling with a million thoughts. I had come here to confront him, but now that I was standing in front of him, I wasn't sure what to say. But then, something inside me snapped. "You know, you're the reason everything is falling apart," I said, my voice colder than I intended. The words hit the air like daggers, sharp and unrelenting. Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, I think you've got the wrong idea." "No." I cut him off, my frustration bubbling over. "You're the reason my marriage is falling apart. Don't act like you don't know what's going on. Don't act like you didn't see it. Feel it." I leaned in closer, my hands gripping the edge of his table. "I'm not stupid. I saw the way she looked at you. I saw the way she laughed at your stupid jokes, the way you touched her like she meant something to you. You're the reason I don't even know who she is anymore." Jake's smile faded, and for the first time, I saw something like surprise flicker across his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "Look, man, I didn't do anything," he said, sitting back in his chair, trying to play it cool. "You're blowing things way out of proportion." "Am I?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then why was she so alive around you? Why did she stop looking at me that way? You didn't do anything? You didn't have to. You were there. You were everything I wasn't. And that's the part that hurts the most. Because she chose you. She chose whatever you were offering over whatever we had." Jake didn't respond at first. He just looked at me, his eyes unreadable. And for a second, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was actually hearing me. But then, with a sigh, he leaned back and shrugged. "You think I wanted this?" he asked, his tone suddenly serious. "I didn't ask for any of this. She's the one who came to me, not the other way around. But that's not your problem, is it?" I didn't know what to say. The anger that had driven me here, that had pushed me to confront him, now felt hollow, empty. I couldn't believe I had come here to fight him. The fight wasn't with him, it was with Claire. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that I needed to face her, not him. I stood up, the weight of the conversation sinking in. I didn't need Jake's validation. I didn't need him to apologize. The truth was, no one could fix this. Not him, not Claire, not even me. I turned to walk away, my body heavy with defeat. But before I took another step, I heard his voice one more time. "Good luck, man," Jake said, and there was no malice in his words, just something that sounded almost pitying. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. I couldn't. Something inside me was broken, fractured beyond repair, and I wasn't sure if I could even look Claire in the eye without seeing everything I had lost. Everything we had been wasn't just gone. It felt like it had been erased. And the weight of it, the depth of the hurt, was unbearable. I didn't want to confront her just yet. Not until I had a clearer understanding of where I stood. Not until I could separate my emotions from the raw truth that had been sitting in front of me all this time. Instead, I spent the night walking. For hours. I didn't have a destination. I just kept moving, allowing my thoughts to get tangled with the city's pulse around me. The streets felt like a blur, like I was detached from the world around me, as if everything was happening behind a veil. The city lights flickered in my periphery, the hum of late-night traffic the only constant sound. I didn't want to be alone, but I didn't want to face anyone either. And the more I walked, the more I realized that I wasn't running away. I was searching for answers I didn't know how to find, searching for a sense of peace I couldn't remember. The whole time, Claire's face haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of her, her eyes filled with guilt and fear, her voice cracking as she apologized, told me how sorry she was. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I even wanted to try. She had made her choice, and in doing so, had carved a new path for herself, one that didn't include me. I found myself at a bar around midnight. It wasn't a place I typically went, but it was quiet, and I needed to be somewhere where the noise of my own mind couldn't drown me. The bartender gave me a nod as I slid onto a stool, and I ordered a drink without really thinking about it. As the amber liquid filled my glass, I stared into it, the light from the neon sign outside reflecting off the surface. Everything felt distant, disconnected. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders," a voice said beside me, pulling me out of my thoughts. I turned to see a man sitting 2 stools away, his eyes scanning me with an amused curiosity. He was about my age, maybe a little older, but there was something in his face that seemed to understand things I wasn't ready to say aloud. "Maybe I do," I muttered, trying to keep my tone nonchalant. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to share my burden. But something about the guy's demeanor made me hesitate. He wasn't pressing. He wasn't prying. He was just there. He chuckled softly. "You know, sometimes it's better to talk to a stranger. They don't have any expectations. They don't judge." I didn't know why I listened to him, but I did. Maybe it was the isolation of the situation, or maybe it was the feeling that I couldn't keep this weight in my chest any longer. So, I leaned in a little closer, the words coming out before I could stop them. "My wife, she's been different. She's been distant for a while now, and I found out she's been seeing someone else. It's like she's already moved on. But I haven't. I'm still here, trying to make sense of everything. And I don't even know where to start." The man didn't say anything at first. He just nodded slowly, almost as if he had expected this, like my story was nothing new to him. He raised his glass and took a long sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "You know, that's the hardest part," he said finally, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "Realizing that the person you thought you knew isn't the person standing in front of you anymore. And then, having to accept that there's nothing you can do about it." I blinked, the words landing heavily in my chest. They were simple, but they hit with the force of something much deeper. The man continued, his gaze growing distant, almost as if he was talking more to himself than to me. "I was in your shoes once," he said, his voice growing softer. "I thought I could fix things. I thought I could save it. But the truth is, sometimes you can't fix what's broken. Sometimes you have to walk away, even if it hurts like hell." The words stung, because they were true, and I knew that they were true. But knowing something doesn't make it easier to accept. I still wanted to fight. I wanted to believe that I could win her back, that we could somehow put this all behind us and start over. But the truth was staring me in the face. Claire had made her choice, and as much as it hurt, I couldn't force her to choose me again. "I don't know if I can walk away," I said, the words feeling too heavy to say aloud. "I don't know if I can just let go." The man smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "It's not easy. It never is. But sometimes, you have to walk away for your own peace. It's the only way you'll ever heal. You can't fix something that isn't yours to fix anymore." I took a deep breath and swallowed the lump in my throat. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier. The thought of leaving, of completely severing the ties I had with Claire, felt like I was ripping apart a part of myself. It felt like giving up. And yet, in that moment, I realized that I hadn't been fighting for her. I had been fighting to hold on to something that was already gone. I had been holding on to a version of us that no longer existed. "Thank you," I said quietly, unsure if the words were enough. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. The man just nodded, his eyes kind but distant. Sometimes we just need to hear the truth, whether we're ready for it or not. I finished my drink in silence, feeling the warmth of the alcohol spread through me, but it didn't numb the ache inside. Nothing could, but for the first time in days, I felt a little lighter. Maybe I couldn't fix this. Maybe Claire and I were beyond repair. But that didn't mean I couldn't move forward. That didn't mean I couldn't find peace. I paid for my drink and stood up, the weight of my decision heavy but no longer suffocating. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I had taken the first step toward letting go. And that was something. I stepped out into the cold night air, my breath coming in slow, steady bursts. The city was still alive around me, but I felt like I was finally starting to breathe again. I woke up the next morning, not with a sense of finality, but with a strange sense of calm. It was the first morning in weeks that I didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. I had made a choice, not the one I thought I would make, not the one I thought I wanted, but a choice that felt right, a choice to finally move forward. I hadn't expected it to come so suddenly, but sometimes clarity arrives when you least expect it. The streets were quieter than they had been the night before, the bustle of the city muted by the soft glow of the early morning sun. I stood by the window, watching the world wake up, as I thought about the steps I'd taken in the past few days. The late-night conversations, the walks that carried me far from home, the quiet realizations that followed. The confusion had finally given way to understanding. And even though my heart still ached when I thought of Claire, I knew deep down that it was the right decision to let go. We had both changed. We had both grown apart. And while the love we shared had been real, sometimes even real love wasn't enough to keep two people together when they were no longer aligned. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But I finally allowed myself to accept that the past was the past. I couldn't hold on to the idea of what we had been. It wasn't about forgiving her anymore. It was about forgiving myself for the mistakes I made, for the things I allowed to go unsaid. I needed to take responsibility for my own happiness. I couldn't wait for someone else to fix it. I had to fix it for myself. As I left my apartment that day, I didn't feel the emptiness I had feared. Instead, there was a lightness in my step that I hadn't experienced in months. I wasn't rushing to forget Claire or erase her from my life, but I was finally accepting the truth that life goes on, no matter how hard it is to face it. And maybe, just maybe, life had better things in store for me than I had ever imagined. I walked through the city, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a blur of people and noise. It was life. It was my life, and it was mine to live. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was strong enough to handle them. I wasn't running away anymore. I was moving forward. That evening, I found myself at the same bar I had visited before. This time, there was no sense of bitterness or anger. I wasn't looking for answers from strangers or drowning my thoughts in alcohol. I was simply enjoying the peace that came from knowing I had made the right choice for myself. I had taken control of my life again. As I sat at the bar, sipping my drink, the door opened and in walked a woman I didn't recognize. She glanced around and her eyes landed on me, a friendly smile playing on her lips. Something inside me stirred, a feeling I hadn't felt in so long, curiosity. She walked over, introduced herself, and we started talking. It wasn't anything spectacular at first, just the usual small talk. But as we spoke, something clicked. A connection, nothing forced, just two people talking, genuinely enjoying each other's company. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers. It was a small step, but it felt significant. I wasn't trying to replace Claire, and I wasn't rushing into something new. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I didn't know where this new connection would lead, but I wasn't afraid to find out. The next few months passed in a blur of new beginnings. I focused on myself, my work, my health, and my own happiness. And, slowly but surely, I found myself healing. The pain of the past never fully disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned how to let go and trust that life, no matter how unpredictable, had a way of bringing you exactly what you need when you're ready for it. Claire and I, though we didn't speak much after that night, both moved on. We found new paths in life. I heard through mutual friends that she had taken some time for herself too, focusing on her own healing, figuring out what she wanted in the future. It wasn't an easy road for either of us, but it was the road we needed to take. A year later, I looked back on everything that had happened, and while I wouldn't say I was thankful for the pain I had gone through, I could say that it had shaped me. It had forced me to grow, to learn to trust myself again. And when I looked at the new people in my life, the friendships I had nurtured, and the love that had gradually re-entered my heart, I realized something important. Sometimes, the end of one chapter isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of something new. I wasn't the same person I had been a year ago, and that was okay. I had found peace. I had found my strength. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally ready to live again.